Good afternoon, morning, wherever you may be, everybody. Happy Thursday. We're into November, first Thursday night primetime game of November. And we have a doozy for you folks for the Showdown slate here. We have the undefeated, it pains me to say this, undefeated Philadelphia Eagles versus the hapless Houston Texans. I don't even know what to say about this team. But it's a showdown slate nonetheless. Well, the money is the same, as Adam always says, and we'll break it down for you like we do any other showdown slate. Cody Main, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Two things off the jump. It's November, but doesn't this feel like a preseason showdown slate? We obviously did the preseason stuff for the sickos that subscribe to the preseason package. And man, some of the names that we're going to be talking about here over the next 30 minutes to 45 minutes will make you feel like you're back in August. And second thing, if I sound a little bit more nasally or if I just start randomly coughing, my kids are walking germ farms, and that'll happen when you have a few of those things running around. So Gary, If I start to just have a panic coughing attack, just fill the air for me, if you would.
You're good. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to air fill while you're here to give the people the goods. So I guess let's dive right in. Yeah. I'd imagine either if you're watching this game, if you're watching this show, you have some sort of money fantasy, something related to gambling going on here. Or no, because even if you're an Eagles fan, you're watching the Phillies tonight. So there you go. All right. Let's talk macro here. Oh yeah, this is the same matchup of the World Series. If you're either city, you're watching you're watching the World Series tonight.
The local markets are going to be down for the NFL tonight.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, this actually one of the rare examples where the outside markets will be getting more hits than the local markets on this game. All right, let's talk some macro here. Obviously, like quickly, Texans. Brandon Cooks is not going to play, I guess, due to protest, and that he didn't get traded. Nico Collins is out. So we are, running bleak with the Texans skill position guys. You do have Dameon Pierce healthy and available. We'll talk through all the gross receiving options for the Texans, but macro wise here, obviously the Eagles are huge favorites. Any takeaways for you off the top?
Yeah, let's talk quickly about the roster construction stuff, because it is very important. And I know some people will look at this, and those of you that have been tuning into the shows will think, man, 14-point spread. I've got Jalen Hurts. I've got A.J. Brown. I've got Miles Sanders. Eagles defense makes a lot of sense. Why only 18.9% projected 5-1, 5 Eagles, 1 Texan? And the reason behind that is all salary based. The second that Brandon Cooks gets ruled out, the second that Nico Collins gets ruled out, it's gonna funnel these cheap guys into lineups at a much higher rate than you might expect. So that's why we're seeing kind of low, I guess, if you want to call it that, 5-1 roster projection. I would imagine that comes up a little bit, would get steamed closer to 20, maybe even up to 25%. And certainly in the contest that some of us are playing, the smaller field single entry stuff, I would expect more people to hand build that. It's really easy to hand build. You can find the one cheap guy that you like from Houston and fit in, the 4th or 5th Philly option that you like. But the things that Gary mentioned with Nico being out, with Brandon Cooks being out, it's really going to make some of these cheap guys look like good plays, even if we think this Houston offense is just a dumpster fire tonight.
Yeah, and to me, it's going to seem like if you do believe the Eagles blow out the Texans, which it's hard to see it going another way, but if you do, it's almost going to be like if you're going 5-1 or 4-2 Eagles, picking the right cheap guy. And we'll try to break that down for you, but it's a real crapshoot over there for these pass catchers for Houston, both tight ends and receivers. So I think that's kind of how it's going to be, because you are going to be able to jam this Eagles money in if you want to.
One other thing that I'll say, and we'll get to this on like the individual at the micro level with some of the options, but if the consensus build on those 5-1s is going to be 5 expensive Philly guys, maybe a mid-tier Philly guy, maybe the kicker, maybe someone like that 5K-ish range, and then the cheap Houston guy. So if you want to flip the build and still go 5-1, find the expensive Houston guy. Maybe that's Dameon Pierce. Maybe it's Davis Mills as a naked bringback.
Yep.
I think that's going to be the way to like flip this build if you still want to play for a Philly blowout. And we'll talk through those options in a second here.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Yeah, it's for as gross as it is on the Texans side, like the paths to getting different are probably going to seem pretty clear, right? Because I think a lot of people are going to be doing the same thing. So we'll talk through all that. All right, let's talk quarterback. Is Jalen Hurts an absolute lock for you no matter what type of format here tonight?
Yep. I won't be playing a single lineup tonight without Jalen Hurts. I just don't know how you get around it. We saw it with, and actually it's kind of funny because the Green Bay Buffalo slate that was just, I think Sunday night, maybe it's Monday night. They all run together at this point. But I think that was a 9.5, 10-point spread. We had the same situation with, with Allen Lazard being ruled out. We had some really cheap Packers wide receivers. And then you have Josh Allen, you have Stephon Diggs on the other side. I think this slate sets up very similarly.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, Josh Allen was 94% or something like that in the lotto, and 30+% at captain. I think we see pretty similar situation here with Jalen Hurts. If you want to make that decision at captain, like, can one of the pass catchers beat him? Can somebody on the Texans side beat him? Sure. I just don't, I don't see the leverage there in trying to beat the 10% of the field that is not going to be rostering Jalen Hurts, and the stuff that I'm playing, it's probably going to be like the 1 or 2% of the field that's not playing him. I think you can always make a case when somebody is this high owned, like, potential injury risk. Maybe he just runs insanely cold on, touchdown scoring. Maybe it's all, the rushing attack, but I would just be hard pressed to run a lineup out there without Jalen Hurts.
I agree. He's a virtual lock. We're looking at around 28% captain ownership. Where would you come in on that?
I'm probably going to be around there. I think, if you think about it just in terms of like his range of outcomes, I think, what we're saying, 3 out of every 10 times this game is played, he's the optimal captain. I think it's probably a little bit higher, maybe 4, maybe even up to 5. So if you want to get a little bit of positive leverage and still play into some of that, it doesn't bother me to play 50% captain Jalen Hurts when he's 28% projected owned. You're still getting a little bit of positive leverage there, and you have 5 other spots. I talk about this a lot, but captain is not the one place where we find ways to get unique. You can find lesser owned captains that help bring that process forward. But we have 5 other roster spots, 5 flex spots where we can find ways to get different with an expensive and a popular captain. And I think the best lineups are still going to have Jalen Hurts at captain with differentiators further down the board.
Agreed. All right, Davis Mills. We talk about this, that it's rare to see a quarterback only come in with 50% total ownership, with like Jacoby Brissett type 60% total ownership. Here we see under 30% total ownership on Davis Mills, and I get it. I mean, the Texans are a disaster. They have basically minor leaguers running routes tonight. That said, 29% in what should be positive game script for that passing game. I don't know. That seems low to me.
Yeah, and I had to look. I've got a database that goes all the way back to 2020 when I've been tracking all of this stuff. The lowest I've ever projected is Cooper Rush at 24.9%. It was in that Dallas, Minnesota game when he had to step in late for Dak Prescott. And I think part of the reason why it was so low there is because it wasn't really known leading up to lock that he was going to even be the starter until, pretty late. If you want to look at it, something even maybe funnier than that situation, Ian Book got a start against Miami, I believe it was last year, had him projected at 29.6% ownership. We've seen it's been very drastic at the extremes this season, both on the Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen side of things, but also on the Jacoby Brissett, Davis Mills, Andy Dalton on the opposite end of that spectrum. The field is not rostering these guys at all, at flex, at captain. And he's a worse point per dollar type play than some of his cheaper teammates. We'll talk about Dameon Pierce in a second here. We'll talk about some of the receivers in a second here. And I think for that reason, that's really going to suppress ownership. And especially in the 5-1, especially in the 4-2 type builds, you're going to be able to get the cheap Texans guys while loading up on the Philly side. And I mean, it's gross, but a starting quarterback should rarely be as low owned as Davis Mills is going to be tonight. And, we saw it with Jacoby Brissett, 22% in that Monday nighter. I think Davis Mills is going to come in right around there. And I think that's, a situation where we should try and get positive leverage on in tournaments. I don't think he's a necessity in cash games because of some of the value that's opened up on the Texan side, but I you can still make a case for it. Quarterbacks are just so strong in this format because we know they're going to touch the ball on every offensive play. We don't have to worry about the positional constraints that we do in other forms of fantasy. So it's ugly. It's Davis Mills. It's a 14-point spread, and we have no idea if they're going to even be capable of scoring a touchdown, but it's still a reasonably strong tournament play at the projected ownership.
Yeah, I think he's bad. I think he's a bad quarterback, but you might get a whole half of essential garbage time here, or close to a quarter and a half at the end. Like, he could just compile his way there. They're going to be throwing. They're going to be forced to throw. I don't think he's like Malik Willis throwing bad. And I don't think he's necessarily Sam Ehlinger throwing bad from what we saw this past week, for use the main slate as an example. So, like, I think even with the terrible targets, like in garbage time, I think he'll be able to move the ball a little bit. Like, there seems like a floor there tonight to me, a weird floor. I know that sounds kind of preposterous given the 14-point spread and the disgusting nature of the Texans, but just the way that I expect this game to run out. I think he's okay. Anyway.
And I would ask you, like, do they pull Davis Mills, or is Davis Mills a guy that's going to get a full 4 quarters regardless? Because I know people are going to ask, what if we just think this is an insane blowout? We might even get questions. You know, we will talk about Boston Scott. You might ask, is Gardner Minshew in play if he gets the full second? Like, at what point will or does Davis Mills ever come out of the game?
Their backup quarterback's Kyle Allen. There's no point in putting him in.
Right.
I don't think there's any point in putting him in. And I also don't think there's any point in them trying to save Davis Mills for the rest of the season. I think Davis Mills is a stopgap to getting a big quarterback this year. I felt that way before this season, even though he looked pretty good last year. And I especially feel that way now where he's been bad this year. I think Davis Mills is a fine tank captain for them right now. And I don't think they have any reason to take him out. All right. Running back here. Could make a really nice case for both of the main 2 running backs on this slate. Miles Sanders, especially considering this has been the one defense that we have absolutely not just liked to attack on the ground. I mean, loved. Just it's been an absolute joy to attack on the ground. We saw Derrick Henry get it done. Obviously, that's the big dog, but we've seen guys do it all year. Josh Jacobs, everyone that gets their hands on this Texans run defense does wonders with it. I would imagine they have a run-heavy game plan this week. I don't know if the ceiling on Sanders is someone as high as Jacobs or Henry when you have Jalen Hurts as your quarterback, who can also take part of that running game. But I would imagine Miles Sanders is going to get a lot of work tonight. Seems like a good captain to me at sub 10%. He's not cheap, 10-4, but it keeps his ownership a little bit in check. So.
Okay, I'm gonna make the bear case for
go ahead.
Miles Sanders, because I want you to come back with maybe an even stronger bull case as you've kind of already outlined here. But Miles Sanders is going to be the lead back in this offense, but he's certainly no bell cow. He's handling 46.5% of the team's rushing share, 34.7% of the red zone share, has only 3 carries inside the 5-yard line. We know he's going to play on short down and distance as he's done, but you have 2 guys that are breathing over his neck in terms of Kenny Gainwell, who's going to get all of the long down and distance work, a majority of the 2-minute work. Then you also have Boston Scott, who came back last week and handled 35% of the team's rushing attempts. And you have Jalen Hurts, who is handling 66.7% of the team's attempts inside the 5-yard line. So I think with that said, I know the game plan is going to be run heavy. I would imagine that they run on at least 50% of their offensive snaps, and I expect them to handle to possess the ball for a large majority of this game. And I know the Texans' run defense is really, really bad. I think there are plenty of outcomes here where we see 17, 18 rushing attempts for Miles Sanders, and he racks up 95 yards on the ground, maybe falls a few yards short of the bonus, probably doesn't handle a lot of the pass catching opportunities, so maybe doesn't get a lot of the pass down work. And on PPR friendly sites like DraftKings, that's going to be important. So at 10-4, like if Miles Sanders just has a really, really good, efficient game on the ground, but doesn't score, doesn't catch a few passes, I think there's an okay reason here to want to fade that, especially as the field is going to talk themselves into a 10-4 Miles Sanders against this just terrible, terrible run defense.
Yeah, that was a well-constructed argument for sure. And I think the biggest piece of that argument is the amount of competitors that he has to run the ball. I think Boston Scott's return was probably one of that underestimated. I didn't even realize that he carried the ball 7 times last week. I think he'd be the guy that I'd be looking to the most as a pivot. I'm not that interested in Gainwell because, as you mentioned, his role is going to be pass catching. If we're going to play into this game as the Eagles will be in control for the majority of it, I think it's Boston Scott is the interesting pivot to Sanders. But I'll say this, Sanders is by far the most talented. I think his efficiency could be through the roof in this matchup. I do think that at least early on in the game, maybe first half, he should get some of that goal line work. And then, if they're trying to keep this to be like a lighter Jalen Hurts day where we can, hey, let's take it easy on him. We don't need to get his body in trouble here. We don't have to get him, throw him out. Maybe less design runs, maybe in the game plan, less reason for him to scramble a little bit. And they do hand it off to Miles Sanders, even if it is a 45% share, 45% share, that's a much higher carry rate than normal weeks in this particular matchup. So I think it's solid. And yeah, I think because of price, you can do those types of things. What you see on screen there, play Sanders and Scott or Gainwell together. I wouldn't play Scott and Gainwell together personally. Right. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you made a good point. When we talk about the target shares, rushing shares, it's all important to keep in mind context. If the Eagles are running 80 offensive plays because the Texans can't do anything and they're running on 50% of those, that's still 40 rushing attempts, right? And if Miles Sanders is getting 45, 50% of those rushing attempts, he could rack up 20 carries very easily in this type of game, given the projected environment that we're playing in. I do think that playing he and Scott together in lineups that you think Philly does cover this 14-point spread, that maybe it gets out of hand quickly. I think that's really sharp because they're going to keep the ball on the ground. You could see the rushing rate climb even higher than the 50% that we're kind of projecting right now. And that's one way to flip the build while still kind of playing these Eagles heavy lineups, because Boston Scott is 1,800. He's going to project worse than some of those Texans guys that are equally cheap. And I think that's one way to get unique. We're projecting really low ownership for Boston Scott. Playing them together, I think, is one way to do the Miles Sanders side and play it in a sharp way.
Yep. I think Sanders does crush here, but I understand the concerns. Gainwell, I think he's just okay. Like maybe he does get more base work on this game just because there should be a lot of opportunity for it. But with Boston, if Boston Scott was out, I would say I like Gainwell a lot more. I think that they don't mind just kind of letting feed Boston Scott there in garbage time. They're trying to save Sanders for what, their playoff run. And then Gainwell, I think, also has that pretty defined role. So I think Scott's interesting. Texans side, Dameon Pierce, 8,600. I think he's by far the most talented, interesting Houston skill position guy in this game. The concerns here are game script. And that's pretty much it for me because he's only 8,600. That's not too bad. The Eagles, as good as the Eagles are, if they have a vulnerability, it's the run defense, giving up almost 5 yards a carry on the season, I believe. So I'm curious how you feel on Dameon Pierce. He is going to be owned 55 total, 11 captain. So it's not like we're sneaking him past anyone, but he's a guy that'll be involved.
Yeah, I mean, Dameon Pierce has really stepped up, and he is, a true bell cow. If we have those concerns that Miles Sanders isn't actually a bell cow because he's going to be sharing and he's got a running quarterback breathing down his neck, like Dameon Pierce is him, if you will. He's handled 86.6% of the team's rushing attempts, 94.1% of the red zone rushing attempts, though, I don't know how often they'll be in the red zone in this game. And, as if that wasn't enough, he finally did leapfrog. And maybe this isn't sticky. Maybe we won't see this going forward, but leapfrog Rex Burkhead late in the game, kind of got some of those 2-minute long down and distance opportunities that he had not been getting in weeks prior. So I think it's kind of arrow pointing up for Dameon Pierce, and at 8,600, he is why you can feel comfortable not playing Davis Mills in cash games, and why I would prefer someone like Dameon Pierce. He's $400 cheaper. The base projection's higher. I think the role is really safe. I don't think they're going to completely abandon the run if they fall behind early.
Yeah.
One way to try and combat this Eagles offense might just be, keep it on the ground, talk about it all the time, establish it, and just hope that we can turn together some drives and handle the ball for a little bit longer than might be expected. So I'm really bullish on Dameon Pierce. You mentioned how bad the Eagles' run defense has been. It's been rough for their run defense, and now they're without Jordan Davis, the big run stuffer up the middle. So I think it's kind of arrow pointing up for Dameon Pierce, and ownership looks to agree with us, align with us a little bit on that. But I'm having a tough time making the bear argument for Dameon Pierce in this game.
Averaging 5 targets a game over his last 20 total targets in that time. Did find the end zone through the air last week. I think that they would, as much as Rex Burkhead should be discussed, and we'll talk about him in a second, I think that Pierce will be on the field as much as possible, because I think if the Texans are going to try to compete, which obviously, they're an NFL team that wants to go out and not fall flat on their face, they need to have their best player on the field. And tonight, he is by far their best offensive player. It's not even close. So I think that the pass game role will be solid as well tonight, as it has been, maybe even higher target share than we've seen of late. All right, let's talk about that other pass catching running back, though, that you had mentioned. He kind of did leapfrog him a little bit in certain situations, but Rex Burkhead, still a guy hanging around. Obviously, last week only did see the 1 target. Before that, though, had seen at least between 5 and 8 targets in 4 of his 6 games. So he's someone that obviously they felt comfortable using through the air. Game script wise, if they decide to go back to him at all this week, would make sense for him to be that guy again. But we just talked about how Pierce might kind of eat into that role even more. Any thoughts on Rex Burkhead at 4,600 tonight?
Yeah, and we talk about this all the time. I've talked about it with Tony Pollard. We've talked about it with other teams when their pass catchers are out. Well, what if they just use Aaron Jones was another example with A.J. Dillon in the backfield. Well, what if they just use their RB2 or their pass catching RB in the slot? And it rarely happens. But this Texans offense is down Nico Collins. They're down Brandon Cooks. They don't have very many competent pass catchers, if any, on the perimeter. And we've already seen them use multi-back sets at the league's 6th highest rate. I think that could even come up a little bit in this game, where they leave Dameon Pierce in the backfield and then start to split Rex Burkhead out into the slot and do things like that. So I think Rex Burkhead makes for an interesting pivot to some of the cheaper wide receivers that we'll get into. And then you have, Philip Dorsett and Chris Moore kind of sandwiching him in price. I think all of that leads to Rex Burkhead getting squeezed a little bit in terms of his ownership. And I don't mind a $4,600 Rex Burkhead. I think that the team does want to keep Dameon Pierce out there in some of these passing situations to get him those opportunities. But I think that they're still going to use Rex Burkhead plenty.
Yep. And then when they got blown out by the Raiders 2 weeks ago, Dare Ogunbowale, I think I'm saying that way,
nailed it.
Did get in there, had only one carry, but did catch 5 balls. I don't know exactly what the context was of that. I'm guessing it was in the last couple of drives of the game. But something to consider if you're playing into that game script as well. So I think
was that week 7?
That was week 7. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so bizarre because he only ran a route on 17% of dropbacks, but had a 18% target share. He got targeted on 100% of his routes.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And that's Davis Mills for you though, right? Like late in the game, they're down 3 scores, trying to come back. They throw Dari out for one drive and he gets you there. Yeah. It's very possible.
Exactly.
So I think he makes your pool. Obviously you're not playing him with Rex. I think you can play him with Pierce, and I think it's just a sprinkle, but I think he makes your pool.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yep. And it's an ugly sprinkle because he's 2K. You get Boston Scott for cheaper, but it's something to consider.
And we're still trying to beat hundreds of thousands of people in some of these large fields. So you have to keep that in mind. Often you're going to lose, but when you do, the old dink strategy, what do you win when you win?
Exactly. All right, let's talk receivers here. Let's start on the Eagles side with players that are actually good at football. AJ Brown, best game of the season last week, just absolutely dominated, was a clear GPP play on the main slate. I hope you guys all played into that one. Tonight, looking like he'll be pretty popular, is 11-2. Again, you can jam in this Eagles money with all these cheap guys we're about to talk about. Any thoughts on AJ Brown versus Devonta Smith and just how you're approaching them in general?
Yeah, I kind of held out hope that this situation would be a wide receiver 1A/1B for as long as I could, but it's pretty clear that AJB is the alpha in this offense. At this point, 31.5% target share, 46% air yard share, leads in red zone target share, leads the team in end zone targets, has the highest weighted opportunity rating in the entire NFL through week 8. So, there's really no argument against AJ Brown. As I kind of mentioned in the article, the only argument you can make against AJ Brown is game script, right? Like if he's not the one doing the scoring early and this does get out of hand, it's going to be really tough to pay off that 11-2 price tag, especially relative to Jalen Hurts, who's only $600 more expensive. If you're asking me straight up, it would be Jalen Hurts at 90%, I think is better than AJ Brown at 62%. And it's kind of a similar story at captain. I kind of want to bet on the ebbs and flows of the NFL, right? And when we see these big eruption spots for one guy, it might shift defensive focus another way. We might see the Texans kind of shade towards AJ Brown in this game. We also might see Jalen Hurts get his boy Devonta Smith going after kind of having a quiet week the week prior. There's really no, way to quantify this, but I think that you see some of that stuff happen throughout the course of an NFL season. And we know that those big eruption games are still within Devonta Smith's range of outcomes. At 8,200, it's a little bit more palatable, and he's not going to be owned. The 3K difference is not going to result in his ownership being skyrocketed, for any stretch. We know that AJ Brown's the wide receiver 1. We know Devonta Smith is the wide receiver 2, and I think they're priced appropriately at this point. But I think we get a little bit of a discount there in terms of price and ownership, and I kind of want to play into that a little bit. So I will have some Devonta Smith captain in tournaments tonight.
Yeah, I agree. Smith is the sharp GPP play here. I like them both, but when you just take into ownership account there, I think Smith's a sharp guy, and you save the 3,000 as well. Any other Philly receivers before we talk about the shit show of the the Texan side? We got Quez. Quez is going to clearly be their wide receiver 3. He kind of runs those streaks. Pascal's involved too. I prefer Quez. I don't know.
Okay, I will say, this isn't for the faint of heart. This is not it's kind of the Dari Ogunbowales of the world, but the times to play a $1,400 Quez Watkins is now when he's 8.9% owned and probably going to be lower because we'll get to these Houston guys in a second here, and keep in mind Quez Watkins 3.8 DraftKings projection right now. And then we'll look at some of these guys like Brevin Jordan on the Texans side and some of these guys that are even cheaper. And you'll look at their base projection and be like, oh man, no one is going to play Quez. The time to play him is now. If he just catches one of those bombs and it's 1 for 50 and a touchdown.
And it could happen in the first quarter, right? And
exactly. If it happens in the first quarter and then the rest of the Eagles guys can get there late, all you need is that one big play. It's obviously a very thin outcome. There's going to be plenty of zeros here. Quez is going to score 0 a lot, but 8.9% ownership. I think it's going to be even lower. That's a play that I'm going to play. And I like playing that in the 5-1s and the 4-2s, because if you get that early touchdown from him, then he doesn't need to do anything the rest of the game. Then you get your Miles Sanders, you get your Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns, and you can move on. But I think that's one way to kind of flip the script and play into those 5-1 builds, is with a really cheap, really low-owned Quez Watkins.
Yeah, and he does average around 1 target a game, but usually it's a bomb, right? They'll take one shot. They'll take one shot to him. He's a good deep ball receiver. I think on a lot of teams he could be like a crappy wide receiver 2, where he's like a high-end wide receiver 3. Like he's not a bad player. So I think he's an interesting spot. Not as interesting as Zach Pascal, who's showing a projection, but at 2,800, I don't know. The other thing going in Quez and Pascal's favor, though, possibly, is expanded snap share at the end of the game. I don't know how they would get involved. I'm guessing they would keep their ball on the ground, but maybe a little end around. I don't know. I'm throwing shit against the wall, basically. Go ahead with that. Yeah.
This is a good question. Quez in single entry or 3 max. I'm going to play single entry and 3 max tonight. I will have Quez Watkins in those formats. Obviously makes a bunch of sense in large field too, where you need to beat a ton of people. But I think that's a one way I can play a chalkier style lineup and still get different with Quez.
Okay, let's talk Houston side here.
Yep.
One thing we know for sure is the Eagles have 2 elite outside cornerbacks, right? And now we're playing with borderline NFL talent receivers. Maybe Philip Dorsett's been around on rosters for a while, but okay, borderline. So let's just talk about who we're expecting to see. On the outside, we're expecting Dorsett and Tyron Johnson, I guess, right? In 3 receiver sets, that's who we're getting on the outside. Chris Moore would be more of the slot guy, I suppose. These are the only 3 receivers that we're projecting for projections right now. Is there no one else?
I would imagine someone's going to get elevated. I don't know if that's been made known yet, but
so keep an eye here. There might be
keep an eye here. I would imagine that there will be a 4th, at least a 4th that we at least project for some level of involvement in this offense. We've seen Jalen Camp in the preseason. We saw Davian Davis. We've seen these guys. They're not going to project for much, but it is something to keep in mind.
Okay. I'll throw it to you then. How are you approaching it? Dorsett's 1,400 under more. Those are obviously your top 2 options. Tyron Johnson, though, is only 200 and only coming with 14% total ownership. This would be the guy that I would just keep throwing in there. But I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, look, this is like a total IKB take. This is a matchup based take, but I don't know what else we have to go off at this point. Like Philip Dorsett is not a good NFL wide receiver. Chris Moore is not a good NFL wide receiver. Tyron Johnson clearly is not a good NFL wide receiver. What I'm doing is I'm flipping the projections on Philip Dorsett and Chris Moore. I think Chris Moore is a much better play tonight for the simple fact, in the lone fact, that he's going to be in the slot. Yep. And I would much rather, the Eagles still aren't bad against opposing slot receivers, but they're much better on the perimeter.
Yep.
I do not want to play against Darius Slay and these perimeter cornerbacks. I would much rather try and target them in the short area of the field, in the slot. And that's where Chris Moore is going to play. 84.4% of his snaps have come out of the slot. So I rarely get too into the weeds on the matchup related stuff, but I'm just going to flip it. I want more Chris Moore than I have Philip Dorsett. And the fact that Philip Dorsett's going to project higher across the industry and is cheaper, I think you're going to see the ownership come up, could get steamed really high in small fields. And $5,400 Chris Moore is going to come in probably closer to 15, less than 20% ownership. That's where I want to be, and just hope that I'm right on the way that this defense can be attacked through the slot.
Dorsett, also the more well-known name, was a first-round pick all the way back in 2015. I'm totally there with you. Moore's, I probably believe in matchup stuff more than most of us do at ETR. So that's one thing I do play into matchup stuff quite often. But 2, especially with cornerback wide receivers, I think that's the one place it really makes sense. But 2, this is the perfect example of when you should use that as a tiebreaker, right? This is all shit show stuff right here. So why not use the better matchup as the tiebreaker? So while we're talking about that middle of the field, though, and let's talk about the Houston tight ends, because they're going to run. You can make an argument that their most talented receivers tonight are in this room. Yes. Not that they're good players. O.J. Howard's a journeyman at this point who had high pedigree. Brevin Jordan's a guy that all best ball players were talking themselves into. The guy has done absolutely nothing this year. And then Jordan Akins was the guy that was around last year. They liked using him in the end, the goal line, jumbo packages. Signs with the Giants this offseason, couldn't get out of the first round of cuts. And then he was basically operating as their tight end 1 like 2 weeks ago. So it seems like a crapshoot between these 3 guys. I want exposure to all of them. Brevin Jordan maybe is the most exciting with the ceiling, from a ceiling perspective. If there's ever a night to use his athleticism and get him involved, it's this night. Take me through the Houston tight end room here.
Yeah, this one seems a little bit more clear to me, and maybe that's because I'm way too deep in the weeds on this stuff and over extrapolating or trying to overfit to a 2-week sample. But Brevin Jordan dealt with an ankle injury early this season, had not played until week 7, where he came back and ran around on 40% of dropbacks, earned a 24% targets per route run in that game. And then in week 8, those routes run climbed to 49%, 25% targets per route run rate. I think the guy might just be like the best available pass catcher tonight.
Yeah, I think
tight end, running back, wide receiver, doesn't matter. I think he might be the best available pass catcher in this offense. And I know he's going to be the highest owned of these three, but I think that is right. I think that Brevin Jordan, I think, young guy, athletic. I think this is a guy that they want to continue to see increase his route participation, where they don't give a damn about OJ Howard or Jordan Akins at this point. So I think that, 40% in week 7, 49% in week 8. He's past the ankle injury that bugged him early in the season. Maybe we see that at 50, 60% tonight. And if he's out there for 50 to 60 more percent of the routes, I think that he's going to do something with those routes. So if I'm playing a cheap Houston Texans tight end, which you're going to have to make some of the lineups work that you want to make work, I think it's Brevin Jordan over the other guys.
Okay, I agree with you. You convinced me, and I think he's the best talent. So let's say I want to play into that role. I think that Houston's playing from behind the whole time. He's by far their best pass catcher. The target share is going to continue to be elite, maybe even higher. Is it too galaxy braining to go like 5% captain in MME here tonight for Brevin Jordan? Is that too much galaxy brain? With all these great skill position players on this slate, is that too galaxy brainy?
No, and I talk about this in the macro article that's up on the site for free for non-subscribers. You should go look at this. If you want to play into that, like, hey, I'm gonna jam in my Miles Sanders, I'm gonna jam in my Jalen Hurts, I'm gonna jam in my AJ Brown, and the only way for me to do that is to get the guy that's 1K at captain. You should only do that in scenarios where you think that 1K captain has at least a close enough ceiling to the other guys that you're fitting in the flex. And does he have a ceiling that can compete with Jalen Hurts on a 1-for-1 level? No. But can he score 2 touchdowns and get close? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. He could be the guy that scores 16 or 18 and Jalen Hurts goes for 24. In those situations, the salary difference is going to be enough where you're going to want Brevin Jordan in the captain so you can fit all those other guys down there in flex. So I talk about that. I think when you play into that, you want the guy that actually has that type of ceiling within his range of outcomes.
It's not that dissimilar from a main slate. Like this past week, we saw Justin Fields be the perfect quarterback, and that's because you needed AJ Brown and DeAndre Hopkins and Alvin Kamara and all these guys to be able to squeeze into your perfect lineup to be optimal. And
yep.
It's similar. If you think that the Eagles blow them out, you want 5-1, 4-2 Eagles, and you want Sanders and AJ Brown and Hurts, but Brevin Jordan's the guy that we think can get 8 for 80 or something on the other end. I think it's reasonable. You don't go more than 5, 6, 7%, in an MME set, but it's something to consider.
Yep.
Philly tight end, it's really Dallas Goedert that we're talking about. You can group him in with, the Brown and Smiths of it all. I would maybe be max 2 of that group tonight. I'm curious if you feel differently. I just think game script wise, I'd be shocked to see them throwing enough where all 3 guys can get there. I know that might be a little bit, much if you're playing into a lot of Jalen Hurts captain, but I think with the 3 main Eagles pass catchers, that's might be where I'm at tonight.
Yeah, I would be certainly max 2 in any lineup that does not include Jalen Hurts at captain. Yeah. Right. You don't want to have 2. You don't want to have 3 of those guys in the flex, which, it just gets really messy there, especially given their respective price tags. I think kind of that mid-tier fits as like a final piece. If you start with the expensive guys and then put in one really cheap guy from the Texans, I think that $6,600 price tag really kind of fits. And we'll talk about DST here in a second, but there's an egregious price tag on the Eagles DST. So I do think that Goddard is going to be pretty popular.
Yeah.
It's just really like, to me at this point, still, I know Dallas Goedert's good. I know Jalen Hurts is good. I know that this Eagles passing offense is super efficient, but like, it's still to me a touchdown or bust type situation. And, at 40%, I'm less likely to play into that. He's just not going to rack up enough volume or receiving yardage in most games to get there without finding the end zone.
Yep. Okay. I think that's fair. All right, let's go DST kickers here. So take me through the Eagles stuff. 7K defense. Crazy.
It is crazy. I have to pull up the database on the DST stuff because I saw this question in Discord earlier in the week, and people were saying, "Oh, it's a pay up to be contrarian spot for the DST, right?" And you would think 7K is a lot for a DST that's projecting for 8.6 DraftKings points. That's a massive salary tag for them. But what happens in these spots with 14-point spreads with one offense that is clearly deficient and much worse than the others is it's like the field becomes emboldened by the price tag to just play them at a higher clip. So you think, man, this is not a great spot to play a 7K defense. And then you come in and you see 30, 40, 50% ownership on these DSTs. And it's happened time in and time out in the past. Steelers, Bucks, Chiefs. I mean, these defenses that are in these spots at 7-8, 7-4, 7-2, 6-6, come in at 42%, 37%, 52%, 29% ownership over the past couple of years. And I think we see a similar situation. People are going to talk themselves into playing a 7K defense despite like a poor point per dollar projection. And so if it's what beats me, it's gonna be what beats me tonight. I will be playing some Eagles DST and the 5-1 stuff that I've talked about a lot in the past, and I'll try to be manipulating that through the solver optimizer. But I think is in a vacuum, just as a standalone play at 33.7% ownership at 7K, it's just a bad play.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's very expensive, and if it's going to come with ownership, then it's tough. I'm still a max 2, even in this type of game where like kickers and defenses can get there in a big spread. I'm still a max 2. Do you Houston defense, like if you want to flip the build, I think is okay. No one's going to play them. They're at home. All it takes is one weird strip fumble type thing. I think I'd get intentionally over on them, even though the Eagles might have the best offense in the league or second best offense in the league. So.
Yeah, agreed. And similar thing on the kicker. Like if we think that maybe this, Kaimi Fairbairn, if we think that this Eagles offense can move the ball on the ground against this porous Eagles run defense, and maybe they find themselves in scoring position, we know coaches love to keep games close. Even if they don't feel close, 14-3 feels a lot better than 14-0 going for it on 4th and 2 at your opponent's 38-yard line or something like that. So we might see them get into scoring range, and this coaching staff just feel comfortable kicking field goals and being down 8 or being down 11 versus, going for a touchdown or actually going for a win here. So I don't hate the Houston kicker, who's probably going to come in below his projected ownership as well.
Yep. And obviously you make a case for Elliott as almost a 30-point implied team total for Philly tonight. All right. You definitely have the honors, sir, because I flag planted a goose egg at a Harrison Bryant. So go ahead and give me your flag plan here tonight. We don't really have time for questions, but go ahead, give me your flag plan.
Charlie called it out in the chat, as he's done a couple of times this season. A 3K discount off of AJ Brown. The field, you and I know at this point that AJ Brown is the alpha in this offense, but that does not mean that Devonta Smith cannot be the highest scoring wide receiver or the highest scoring player on any given one game slate. And I think that happens tonight. I think Devonta Smith gets back in the box score in a big way after last week's 7.3 DraftKings point performance. Give me Devonta Smith for optimal captain tonight.
Very good. I'm going to stick to what's been the best matchup for fantasy all year, and that's Houston against the ground. The Miles Sanders thing at 10-4 is very, very expensive, and I get that game script can go in a certain way, which might keep his carries down a little bit. But I believe in Miles Sanders as a talent. I think because he's 10-4, we're only seeing around 8% captain. I think he should be 12, 13, 14% in your builds. So for that reason, I'm going to go Miles Sanders. But I will say with like a 1B of Boston Scott, I want plenty of both of these guys because I think it makes sense for these guys as between the tackles. We also know the Eagles are prone to use Boston Scott in the red zone. They've done it a lot. So I think I like both of them equally. I'm going to go Miles Sanders as being, super high ceiling with a little under-owned at captain. But Boston Scott's kind of like my side piece flag plant as well, if you will. So I'm going there. Cool. I think that'll do it. We'll be back. I think maybe Sunday night. We'll talk. Cody and I will talk. I might be able to do a Sunday show this week. So we'll talk at the very least. Hopefully, if not, you'll see us Monday night for Showdown. But definitely enjoy the game tonight if you're one of the few watching. And if you're one of the 313 people on the stream right now, I would imagine that you will be one of the people watching this game. Enjoy it. Good luck to you all, and hope you win lots of money.